Today, we're in a series called Achilles, and we're talking about the one thing, if you're watching online, we're talking about the one thing that every single person in this room has a problem with, this one thing, and this one little thing is called pride, all right? And we said this last week, that the root of almost every issue is pride. When you break it down, the issues that you have in your life, the things that you deal with, really stem down to the root problem of pride. When you're talking about marriages and you got things that are going on in your marriage, hey, if you stem back in the argument, it's probably an issue with pride. When it comes to just thinking that you're always right, the reason why you feel like you're always right is because pride says that you are right. So we're not talking about like the good kind of pride. And right now, like it's graduation month, kids are getting all these sort of like accolades and things like that, or you've had some accomplishments. Nothing wrong with being like proud of your kids in those moments. That's like good pride. Like we should be proud of like when people we love do something great. We're talking about like the evil kind of pride, the one that kind of says, hey, I'm never wrong in this argument. As a matter of fact, I'm always right. And there's no need to apologize because I'm not at fault. It's the type of pride that pushes your kids too hard because you don't want them to bring shame to your family name. It's the type of pride that makes it to where you feel like you're better than other people. But I think this is funny. There are countless studies that talk about this thing called illusory superiority. It's a mouthful, all right? Illusory superiority. It's when a person widely overestimates their abilities. All right, this is when a person thinks they can do a lot better than they actually can. That's why we have 5 softball teams at Cornerstone. All right, it's because, and I'm just saying, what I'm saying is this, that it's okay if you ain't got it like in the early 2000s. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's all right. It's like 23 years later now, and you may not be as fast or as good as you were. I think it's funny that you can look online, you can fact check me on this, but 8 out of 10 Americans believe they are above average drivers. All right, well, that's funny because only 50% can be average, so only half, but 8 out of 10 believe they are above average drivers. And listen, I am not in that bracket. I'm in the 2 out of 10 because I got that 100% from my mom. I'm a 100% Asian driver all the way, like not a good driver, all right? My wife will tell you that. You should have seen what was like me driving in Ireland on the wrong way, you know what I mean? Like it was crazy thing. She's like, edge, right? Like, because I'm not used to driving this way, right? It's one of those things. People are unaware sometimes of their own abilities. I love this quote from American poet Charles Bukowski. He said this, "The problem with the world is that the intelligent people are full of doubts, while the stupid ones are full of confidence." I love that. It's like the famous last words, hold my beer. You know what I mean? Like, you know, something dumb is about to happen, right? And here it is, I think pride is what causes this in our lives over and over and over again. I love what James, he's the half brother of Jesus, he said this, and he, God, gives grace generously. And as the scriptures say, God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. In other words, God literally opposes the proud. And so what James is doing is he's quoting Proverbs 3:34. He says, God actually opposes people who are proud, but he gives grace to people who are humble. So the way that if you want to experience God's blessing in your life is to chase humility. And so if there is pride, and most of us tend to chase pride, then the answer to that is to chase humility. And the hardest thing for us to do today is to chase humility. It's the thing that we all want in other people, we want in ourselves, but yet rarely we won't choose it. So today's going to be kind of a character study of a life of a guy named Moses. And so we'll look at just 4 quick thoughts this morning. First is this, that our circumstances often lead to pride. Our circumstances, your circumstances, will often lead you to pride. Now, you can read the life of Moses and where we're going to be at in the book of Exodus. You can look at the first 4 chapters, and kind of get an idea of what's going on in his life. But Moses has an incredible story. And I love what it says in Numbers chapter 12, verse 3. It says, now, this is in parentheses, now Moses was very humble, more humble than any person on earth. Now, this is the way my brain works. Moses wrote that book, all right? He wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So can you imagine, like, you're writing down, like, for all of eternity, like thousands of years, this is gonna be passed on, and you're writing in the third person. It's like, now Moses was very humble. How humble was he? More humble than any person on earth. It sounds like Michael Scott. You know what I'm saying? Like, here he is. He's literally writing that. And I just have to think when he writes it, you can't help but like laugh a little bit, you know? But as I study the scriptures and as I know, and if you continue to read Numbers chapter 12, you see that statement is true. You know, God spoke through Moses and told Moses what to write. So it wasn't like Moses was choosing to write these words himself. God was telling him what to write. And I think that is just so funny, like just even like writing that, like it'd be like a memoir for like your entire family for generations, like 3 generations down. It's like you're writing in the third person now. Daniel was very humble. Man, I am so humble. As a matter of fact, he's so humble, you've never seen a more humble person than this man was humble, right? Like it's one of those things that Moses writes there, but Moses' story wasn't always that way. He wasn't always humble. I don't know if you've heard about his life, but he had a crazy life. And we'll kind of, like I said, dance through some of this. We won't look at all these scriptures. We'll be here a very long time if we did. But Moses was a Hebrew, born in the country of Egypt. Now, why were the Hebrews in Egypt? You have to rewind the story to a guy named Joseph, who was in Egypt, who was kind of like the head ruler outside of Pharaoh, and all of their family moved there, and the Hebrews began to multiply. Here you have several generations later, a new Pharaoh who knows nothing about Joseph, just knows that as he looks out over his kingdom, that the Hebrew people were beginning to outnumber the Egyptian people. And so he did what he thought was best, is he made them all slaves. And as he saw that they were beginning to outnumber them, he told all the midwives to any baby that was born to take that baby and then to throw that baby boy into the Nile River and kill them. Now you can imagine, like what would you do if that was you? You could say that these midwives had a midwife crisis. No? All right. Someone told me to share that joke this morning, and I went for it, and man, that one was a fail. But I'll take it. That one was on me. I still said it. So obviously these women don't do it. And the Pharaoh finds out, and he was beyond furious. And so he literally sends his soldiers to go from house to house to house, looking for boys ages 2 years old and under, where he would take their babies and then would throw them into the Nile River. Can you imagine the travesty and the pain and the hurt that day? I believe that there were probably dads and moms who were killed because they wouldn't allow their child to be taken away. It was just a horrific scene. And in an act of desperation, Moses' mom puts him into a basket and floats him down the Nile River. I mean, this is crazy, but you can imagine like just her sheer sense of just needing to do something in desperation. And by happen chance, we know that God's sovereignty allowed this to happen. The baby's basket ends up at Pharaoh's palace, where his daughter finds this baby. And she knows it's a Hebrew baby, and she knows that this mom was desperate, and so she decides she would raise this child as her own. But in those days, they would hire nurses to feed these babies, and so there was Moses' sister kind of tracking along what was happening, and she says, I know someone who could nurse this baby. And so Moses' mom got paid to nurse and raise her own child. How awesome is that, moms, right? If you could get paid for actually like raising your kids, right? Wouldn't that be amazing? You would make a lot of money because it's a difficult job. And so he lives in the palace. And Moses, honestly, like if we could say this about anybody, he grew up privileged. He had whatever he wanted. He was the grandson to Pharaoh, and he adopted him in. And so much so, you just have this idea of like he was entitled. He felt like he could do whatever he wanted. As a matter of fact, one day when Moses was older, he saw an Egyptian man harshly treating one of the slaves, and because he knows that, hey, I'm a Hebrew and he's just beating this Hebrew in front of me, he goes and he kills that Egyptian man because he thought, I can do whatever I want whenever I want. And I think that there are two things that will lead to pride in your life, all right? There are two things. The first one is this: when you have everything and you don't need anything. When you come from stuff, it gives you this sense of like entitlement. You become very prideful. When you just have everything that you want, everything that you need, you never have to like worry about anything. It causes you to have a sense of entitlement. Like this is just the life that you're used to. You're used to things. And I don't know about you, but if you've done like Walmart pickup lately in East Gadsden, it's been kind of rough. It's been kind of rough this week, right? Groceries are not coming out as fast as they're supposed to. And that pride will cause you to be upset without even thinking about what's going on behind the scenes. Hey, the second thing that I think will lead to pride is when you come from nothing. And like, well, that's kind of a crazy thing. If you come from nothing, you have nothing, but you get older and you get something and you make a name for yourself, then it becomes, look at what I did. I came from this. I came from nothing. And we love these stories. It was like, but look at what I did. Look what I accomplished. And that also causes pride. So let me just say this. I don't consider myself a parenting expert. I have a 13, 10, and 6, and I think I'm still figuring stuff out. Don't give your kids everything. It's okay if other kids have things that they don't have. It's okay that they feel left out in that way, but mom, but dad, who cares who they all are? Doesn't matter that other kids have things that they don't have. It's okay to say no. They don't need more stuff, they need more of you. So I just say, it's okay, don't be so quick to rescue them. If they go to school and they forget their lunch, let them go hungry for one lunch period. Let them go hungry. You don't have to rush off to school and make sure they get it, because I promise you, they won't do it again, right? They won't do it again. Let them suffer a little bit, because if you don't let them learn to fail in an environment where you're there to help them and point them in the right direction, they're going to grow up entitled and spoiled, all right? It's okay that they don't have everything. That's just take it or leave it. Hey, I'm not raising your kids, all right? I think I'm just doing subpar raising ours, all right? I got my 13-year-old right here, and hey, you ask him, all right? It's okay, but that's what puberty does to a kid, you know what I mean? It messes with you a little bit. Are you super embarrassed now? So it's like the only time he sits right down front. I don't make him do that, so just like to also point that out. He's not one of those like, hey, sit down front, all right? But here's the thought. I forgot we're online as well. So typically we don't stream the service. So online, this is behind the scenes of what a service is really like here at Cornerstone when we're not actually live. But here's the thought. You have to chase humility or it will chase you. If you don't chase humility, it will chase you. It will come after you. Here's the second thought. If pride rules your life, you will eventually be humbled. Moses, when he kills that man, he begins running for his life, and he just ends up running out in the desert. And when you read in the book of Exodus 2, 3, and 4, we don't know a lot about his life, but he spends 40 years in the desert. Now, you can imagine this is very difficult. We know Moses gets married. We know he has the kids. And he knows he ends up working for his father-in-law, who was a shepherd. And so now they're living this nomadic lifestyle of constantly moving around. And you have the story of like rags to riches. This is like riches to rags. He goes from having everything to literally having nothing. And he's just living in the desert. And some of you might be here today. You might feel like you're going through a desert season in your life. Things are difficult maybe within your marriage. You feel like it's just this desert season. Maybe it's within your job and you're not understanding why you can't get the promotion or can't get the raise. Maybe for you, you're thankful that like school is over because it's been just a desert season at school. Maybe you feel like God isn't answering you and he feels distant. You just feel like you're in this desert season. I want you to understand that maybe God is trying to humble you in your life. And now if you're a follower of Jesus, you have a relationship with God, that's who I'm talking to this morning. Maybe God is trying to humble you. Now, at the same time, I want to also say that just because you're going through a hard time doesn't mean that God is humbling you. Jesus never promised that following Jesus would be easy. He said it will be difficult and you will face hardships. But at the same time, maybe you're going through a difficult season because God's trying to get your attention and he's trying to humble you. Pride says, I'm right. And humility says, I might be wrong. How do you see it? Right? Can you imagine you're fighting with your spouse, you're arguing, you're like, you know something? I might be wrong. So how do you see it, I thought maybe if I just stepped back for a second and really thought about this, you actually might be right. And honestly, I totally lost it there. So I apologize. Whatever you say, that's probably the right answer, because I just can only see it from my perspective, right? No one does that. But yet, humility allows us to see that, hey, maybe the other person might be right. Erin and I, we've been married for 15 years, and most of our arguments in our marriage is because she refuses to see it my way. You know what I'm saying? Like, there'd be way less arguments if she just went along with my plan. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I speak on behalf of God, okay? Like, I'm pretty sure I'm right. You know what I mean? Like, I'm pretty sure, like, this is the way it's supposed to be. But I know it's only been 15 years and she will change. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know. No. I honestly, recently, I have learned that I have a lot of pride buried deep inside my heart. Like, I think when you get to that spot where you really dive deep, you see some things about yourself you don't want to see, like that ugly part of you. And I know for me, there's some things in my heart and in my life, and I'm like, man, I didn't know that was there. And honestly, that's difficult to face. I honestly, I don't like to think that I have anything wrong with me. I like to think that I don't make bad choices. I like to think that I don't have failures or shortcomings. And when they get pointed out in me, I like to quickly reverse it and go, no, let's hold the mirror at you instead. I have some things in my heart that I have to work on and change, because the reality is no one person in here is that great. You can't be. We're human beings and we're flawed. And when I see that in myself, it shows me I've got a lot of learning to do. So you'll either learn to be humble or you will continue to be humble. You either learn to be humble or you'll continue to be humble. Here's a third thought. Chasing humility helps you realize God's way is the best. When you chase after humility, it helps you see God's way is best. And here's the reality about God's way. Or Drake says God's plan, right? God's plan. You guys gonna leave me up here hanging like that? A couple of y'all. All right, that's fine. I thought this was a cool service. It's fine. Like, I thought we had it like that. I'm like trying to bust it out on y'all, just give me a little soft laugh. That's fine. Moses' life made no sense. Think about it. His mom literally puts him into a basket and floats him down the Nile River in hopes that he'll just land somewhere safe. Could you imagine if something like that happened in America and it was just difficulties and you're trying to save your kid's life, and so you put him in a basket and you float him down the Coosa River? You know a redneck's getting that kid, right? Hey, Mildred, I found a baby. Let's raise it. You're like, no. Put it back in the water. Put it back in the water. Could you imagine? He gets found. This is crazy, right? He gets found, and it just happens. And we know it's God's sovereignty. We know it's God's plan. He gets found by Pharaoh's daughter, and then he's just raised in this thing. But then, he goes out in the desert, and then what happens? It says in scriptures that literally Moses meets God in a burning bush. And I'm like, dude, you've been out in that heat way too long. You're talking to a flaming bush right now. This makes no sense. This bush is on fire, and you're talking to it, and it's God. And then God tells Moses to go back to the place he ran away from. And then he says, hey, I need you to go talk to Pharaoh, which, just newsflash, is his half-brother is now the Pharaoh. Go back and tell him that his entire workforce, the entire hundreds of thousands of people that have literally built his nation, tell him to let them go. Free. And you're gonna go on with your life. Like, okay, like that's not like any small task. And then when you read scriptures, you read about like the 10 different plagues that God causes. And, sometimes people who are atheistic or don't believe in God or would question the Bible will talk about, or a lot of times point to the 10 plagues and go, there's just no way this or that. And I would honestly, this is a whole nother conversation for another day, but I would also tell you it takes a whole lot of faith to believe that there is no God when you look around at all the things that would have to happen and the microcosm of chances of things that have to take place for something to take place just for us to even be here today. It's pretty wild in and of itself. I would say it takes a lot of faith to believe that as well. And so I believe God causes these plagues to happen to get Pharaoh's attention. And finally, this is where we get the Passover, where the angel of death came through and kills every firstborn Egyptian son. And the Pharaoh, losing his son, tells Moses, get your people and leave. And as the people are leaving, the nation of Egypt is just giving them all of their gold, all of their money, like, please get out of here. And so they're walking, and as they get to the Red Sea, which is a huge body of water, Pharaoh changes his mind and is like, nah, we're gonna kill them, we're taking them back. So can you imagine, you have hundreds of thousands of people, you show up to this huge body of water, and now you got an army chasing you. The way I think, I'm like, why did you walk that way? You don't even have boats. You know what I mean? Like, that didn't make sense at all. Were you gonna like whistle for a humpback whale, like what's gonna happen? You know what I'm saying? And yet, Moses is freaking out because the people are freaking out. He's like, God, what do I do? And God's like, check it, raise your hands. Could you imagine Moses stepping up to the entire Red Sea and he's just like, I mean, that's gotta look kind of crazy, right? And what does God do? He splits the Red Sea. Literally, they walk through on dry land. They cross the other side. The Egyptian army is gone. And then here they are in the desert. They're wealthy. Now they're homeless and they're walking around. And then God tells Moses something that I think is really wild. He says, Moses, I set this up with Abraham a long time ago, but your people have no idea about this. And so he teaches them about tithing. He says, hey, your people have all this stuff and all this wealth, and I'm gonna teach you to give 10% back to God. And he goes in this whole thing and he establishes this tithe, and it's kind of crazy. They're going, what do you mean? God gave us all this. Now we have to give 10% of it back to God. And I think maybe some of you can relate to that. Maybe right now in your life, you've never had more money than you've ever had in your life, but yet your life seems like it's a mess. Maybe it's because you're not honoring God in this form of giving. And again, I'm talking to just people who have a relationship with God. And tithing is this backwards concept when you live on 90% and you give 10% back to God because it belongs to him, because he takes care of you. And you're saying, God, I trust you with this. And it's just a way to just honor God in your giving. And if you feel like, this is where pastors are always asking for money, this or that, hey, what I will tell you is there are literally hundreds of churches in Etowah County. Give your money to any one of those churches and you keep coming here. You're gonna find that you're gonna grow here, your kids are gonna engage here, you're gonna be married and things may improve, and you're gonna just find your life just gets better as you lay your foundation on Jesus, and you'll find it doesn't matter where you give because it's about your heart, and you'll experience what it's like to live on 90% with God's blessings and 100% of you doing it yourself. I just literally had a phone call the other day. I'll do these things called 90-day giving challenge, where I'll challenge people to give for 90 days who've never done it before. I just had a phone call, and he says, hey, Pastor, I know it's been several months since the giving challenge. He said, I didn't really have anything to share. It's but I just have to tell you what just happened to me. And he shares this whole just huge thing that happens to him in his life. He says, I believe this wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been honoring God in my giving. And he says, I just want to tell you thank you. It changed his life. And I'm just letting you know that it doesn't make sense, but pride will keep you from giving back to God what already belongs to him. Here's the fourth thought. Humility helps you see that you need others. Humility helps you see that you need other people. You can't do life alone. And you might think you got it under control, you don't need anyone, but the reality is pride is what causes you to say that. We all need people. No one in here possesses all of the greatness, all of like the most amazing qualities. None of us in here have that. None of us in here are perfect. We all need people. And if you're married, you can't do marriage alone. You need your spouse to do the other part. And if you have kids, if you're trying to raise them, if you're parenting them, you need the other person to help in that. And even if you're a single parent, you still need people to help you out. You can't do life alone. We were never created to do life alone. As a pastor, there's no way I could lead this church by myself. We actually have elders that are here. And this morning in our first service, we actually put in a new elder. You'll meet him at the end of our service. And elders are just men who are called by God who help serve this church spiritually and help lead this church. So me and several men lead this church as elders. And then we have deacons in our church, and depending on your church background, our deacons have no authority here, all right? They don't tell us what to do. We tell them what to do. As a matter of fact, like they're just servants. They just help serve in various ministries in our church, and we can't do half the stuff that we do without them. And we have a staff, and we have incredible people who help do everything that you see on a Sunday. And honestly, I love that there are things that happen within this church I have no idea that's going on, because I don't have to know everything, because this isn't my church. I'm not the boss here. And I'm so thankful that I get to be a part of what God is doing. Even Jesus had 12 disciples, and out of 12 disciples, he had 3 guys that were in his inner circle. When you read about Moses in Exodus, you find that like he says, God, I don't want to go do this. And God says, I'm going to give you your brother Aaron, your full brother. He's going to go with you, and he's going to help you. And then later on, when they're in the desert and his father-in-law comes for a visit, he sees Moses literally like Judge Judy sitting up there judging all the people all day long. And he says, this isn't healthy for you, and taught him what it was like in terms of leadership and splitting things up so that he only handles the most important issues. The reality is we can't do life alone. We need people on our team. So who's on your team? Who are those people that are on your team? Pride makes us feel like we don't need anybody on our team. I love this last thought here, that pride triggers God to oppose us. Humility invites God to bless us. You see, when you have pride in your life, it actually triggers God to oppose you. Now, just for a moment, I'm going to talk to people who have a relationship with Jesus here. If you have pride in your life, it's actually a sign for God to begin opposing that pride in your life. Because, see, as followers of Christ, it says we are children of God, and God will do anything he can to discipline his kids so they know, hey, the path you're choosing isn't the right one, and he will oppose us. But the flip side of that is humility invites God to bless us. Hey, I don't know about you, but I want God's blessings on my life. I want him to bless me. I don't want to walk around constantly feeling like God is opposing me because I'm too prideful to see that it's my own self that's causing this disconnect. One of the things I've learned in life when it comes to leadership in churches, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to parenting, when it comes to leading a staff, all of the common denominators in all of the issues I've ever had is me. I'm the common denominator in every single issue I've ever had. And every single issue you've ever had, every single time that neighbor or that coworker or that spouse or your kid or your family or your mom or your dad, they say this thing and you have this issue with them, every single time I want you to understand that the common denominator in all of your issues is you. And maybe, just maybe, deep inside of your heart, there are some areas of pride that you haven't seen yet because you refuse to see it. I want you to understand this morning that you're either going to chase pride or you're going to chase humility. You can't chase both, but you will chase one. So which one are you going to chase? Let's pray.